The photograph is small, faded, almost innocent. At first glance, it is only a girl in a white dress, seated before a row of dolls. But look closer. Her skin is gray, her eyes half shut, her lips rigid as stone. Rose Cavanaugh was already dead when this image was taken. The dolls around her were not placed for comfort, but for confession. What happened in that farmhouse outside of Bangor, Maine, in the winter of 1884, is a story almost no one remembers. A story that was buried in parish records, erased from newspapers, and whispered only in corridors of institutions sworn to secrecy. In the opening seconds of this account, you must understand, this is not the tale of a girl who merely died. It is the unraveling of a town, a church, and a family complicit in horrors they swore never to speak of again. The Cavanaughs were not prominent people, farmers, Catholics, devout by every appearance. But Rose's death left a wound that stretched far beyond the farmhouse walls, because when the parish priest arrived to pray over the body, he refused to enter the room. He claimed she was not alone, and so began the silence. Rose Cavanaugh was 10 years old, frail, quiet. Too quiet, neighbors said, as if she had never quite learned to live among the other children. She spent her days with dolls, 6 in total, each meticulously named and kept in perfect condition. She did not play with them, she spoke to them, hours at a time. Her mother, Eleanor, insisted it was harmless. Her father, Thomas, disagreed. He forbade the child from bringing the dolls to church, but she defied him. Each doll was dressed in scraps of old parish garments, stitched into strange miniature vestments. By autumn of 1883, whispers spread that Rose was no longer attending school. Some claimed she had been removed because of illness. Others, because she disrupted class with muttering fits, talking to her dolls in voices not her own. The town of Bangor, like much of New England, was suffused with superstition and Catholic dread. It had been only 50 years since Puritan fears had faded, but the shadows of possession still lingered. The priest, Father Callahan, warned Eleanor to burn the dolls. She refused. Eleanor claimed the dolls were the only voices that understood her daughter. But when Rose died in her bed on February 6, 1884, the dolls were arranged neatly around her, as if watching. And her father swore he heard them whisper. In 19th century America, post-mortem photography was common. Death was familiar, almost domestic. Families posed with their dead to remember them, to fight the erasure that decay demanded. But Rose's photograph was different. It was not a memorial. It was evidence. The photographer, Samuel Harrow, was summoned by Eleanor against her husband's wishes. Harrow would later write in his private diary, fragments of which survive in Bangor Historical Society, that the mother insisted on arranging the dolls herself. In the photograph, Rose sits upright, propped by a wooden brace, her hands delicately clasped. The 6 dolls are placed before her in an uncanny half-circle, one cradled in her lap. Harrow noted that Eleanor whispered the dolls' names under her breath while positioning them, as if introducing them to the lens. When Harrow developed the plate that night, he described something he could not explain. The doll's eyes appeared glacier, almost wet. In one exposure, one doll's head tilted toward Rose, though he swore no one had touched it. That photograph circulated briefly in Bangor before being confiscated by the parish. Today, only a single copy is rumored to exist, locked in diocesan archives in Portland. But whispers of it persist. Not because it shows a dead child, but because many who saw it claimed the dolls' faces were changing. Father Callahan's testimony is fragmentary, obscured by clerical censorship. But enough records remain to suggest that what happened at the Cavanaugh home unsettled him beyond repair. He arrived to administer last rites. Eleanor begged him to bless the dolls alongside her daughter. Callahan refused. He claimed such objects carried spirits unfit for consecration. The neighbors later swore they saw the priest exit the farmhouse, pale and trembling, muttering that a confession was being kept by children not alive. He refused to enter again. The Cavanaugh funeral was held outside the churchyard gates, an unusual dishonor, justified with vague language about circumstances unfit for holy ground. Behind closed doors, Callahan pressed the bishop to authorize an inquiry. The bishop denied him, citing the danger of scandal. Bangor, already rattled by anti-Catholic sentiment, could not afford the stain of heresy or demonic suspicion. The case was sealed, but Callahan's own writings, uncovered after his death, tell another story. He described dolls that spoke in liturgical rhythm, echoing confessions of sins not belonging to the Cavanaugh family, sins belonging, perhaps, to the parish itself. Callahan warned the girl carried not her own griefs, but the parish's. The dolls were not nameless. Rose Cavanaugh preserved their titles in a notebook that surfaced decades later, discovered in a cedar chest when the farmhouse was demolished. Each doll bore a name lifted from the parish registry, not living children, but those already dead. Margaret, age 7, Stephen, age 9, Clara, age 6, Joseph, age 5, Anne, age 8, Michael, age 10. All had died between 1871 and 1879. Children buried in unmarked graves after outbreaks of scarlet fever, accidents on farms, or sudden unexplained illnesses. Rose, who had never met these children, called them her brothers and sisters. She whispered their names to her dolls each night. When asked why she chose them, she answered plainly, because they never confessed. Someone must hold their sins. Eleanor dismissed this as imagination. But Thomas, her father, suspected otherwise. He had helped dig the shallow parish graves. He knew those children had not been given proper rites, and now, through Rose, it seemed they were speaking again. Before she was withdrawn from school, Rose displayed strange behaviors that her teacher, Miss Alden, recorded in a private letter to the superintendent. The girl often froze mid-lesson, staring at the corner of the room as if listening. Then, in a low monotone, she repeated phrases that unsettled the other children. Father Callahan has lied. They are not where he said they are. They are beneath the floor. The teacher believed Rose was imitating gossip overheard from adults. But her words were too precise. She referenced burial places unknown to a child, sins only priests whispered in confession. One winter morning, she scribbled drawings in charcoal, 6 crude figures holding hands around a blackened circle. When asked, Rose said, "That is where they go when the bells stop ringing." By December, Miss Alden begged the Cavanaughs to withdraw their daughter. She feared not for Rose, but for the other children, who had begun leaving offerings of pins, ribbons, and food at Rose's desk, terrified of angering her unseen companions. Rose's funeral was unlike any the town had seen. The coffin remained closed. No procession was allowed into the church. Instead, the Cavanaugh family stood outside the iron gates of St. Mary's, clutching rosaries in the cold wind, while the priest muttered abbreviated prayers. No hymn was sung, no bells tolled. The dolls, Eleanor insisted, were placed inside the coffin with her daughter. Thomas protested, but Eleanor screamed that they were hers in life and must remain so in death. Witnesses remembered the sound the coffin made when lowered, not a hollow thud, but a muffled rattle as if objects shifted inside. That night, neighbors reported hearing scratching from beneath the fresh soil. Dogs in the parish cemetery barked through the dark hours until dawn. Within weeks, 3 more children in Bangor fell ill and died. Each claimed in delirium before death that Rose was calling them. In 1891, 7 years after Rose's burial, an assistant archivist in Portland uncovered a restricted ledger belonging to St. Mary's. Inside were notes written in Father Callahan's hand, then crossed out by a superior. The surviving fragments read, "Dolls are confessional vessels, voices travel, girl not possessed, but burdened, children of parish, sins absorbed, no shrift given." The archivist, unnerved, sent copies to Boston for clerical review. The documents never returned. He was instructed to destroy the ledger. Instead, he hid it. Only fragments survive today, scattered in private collections. The notes suggest a terrifying possibility. The dolls were not cursed by accident. They had been made, dressed, and given names deliberately. Not by Rose, not by Eleanor, but by someone within the parish. The question remains, why? After Rose's burial, Eleanor refused to leave the farmhouse. Curtains drawn, doors locked, she sat in Rose's room for hours, cradling scraps of fabric that once clothed the dolls. She whispered the dolls' names like prayers. Neighbors said she stopped eating. Her face grew hollow, her eyes fevered. She told visiting kin that Rose still visited her in dreams, yet never as a child. Instead, Eleanor described a grown woman with her daughter's face, holding 6 children by the hand. Thomas pleaded with the priest for intervention, but Callahan only muttered, "I cannot enter that house again." By midsummer, Eleanor's hair had whitened. She claimed she could hear the dolls beneath the soil chattering at night like children in a schoolyard. She often walked barefoot into the yard and pressed her ear to the ground until dawn. When Thomas threatened to have the parish burn the dolls buried with Rose, Eleanor turned on him violently. Witnesses said she struck him across the face, hissing, "They will take you first." Behind closed doors, whispers spread that Rose's case was not unique. Father Callahan had overseen several quiet burials in the 1870s and 1880s. Children dead before confession, children interred without the sacraments, their sins unresolved. A parish tradition emerged. Dolls, stitched from parish garments, were given to these children in life or death. The dolls served as vessels, confession by proxy, a secret ritual, unspoken but sanctioned. But the practice carried a terrible flaw. When children like Rose clung to the dolls, they did not release the sins. They bore them. They became walking reliquaries of shame, grief, and corruption, belonging not only to their families, but to the entire parish. Callahan, tormented by guilt, wrote that Bangor was a parish of walking confessions, its children carrying the weight of crimes never admitted by adults. Rose was the most visible, the most dangerous, and so her funeral was arranged as a silencing, not a farewell. Unlike Eleanor, Thomas refused to succumb to superstition. He turned to work, plowing, mending, trading, anything to stay away from the silence of the farmhouse. Yet the silence followed him. Neighbors recalled seeing him drink heavily in taverns, muttering about whispers in the fields. He claimed that when he struck the soil with his plow, it groaned beneath him, as if hollows stretched just under the earth. One night, Thomas returned home to find Eleanor seated in Rose's chair, holding a child's rosary that had not belonged to their daughter. When he demanded where she had found it, she smiled faintly. She brought it from beneath. That same night, Thomas dug into Rose's grave by lantern light. Witnesses said he was found at dawn, kneeling in the open earth, his fingernails torn and bloody, screaming, "They are not hers, they are not hers." No record survives of what he saw, only that his health collapsed within weeks. He died of fever before winter. Eleanor, now widowed, remained alone with the dolls that were no longer there, but never gone. By 1886, strange reports spread among Bangor's children. Several claimed to see Rose at the edges of the cemetery, pale and watchful, surrounded by her dolls. One girl said Rose invited her to play confession. When asked what that meant, the child explained, "You sit still, and she whispers everything you ever did wrong, even things you never told anyone." The girl wept as she said Rose had been correct. Another boy was found wandering near the parish crypt at night, repeating in a monotone, "She says it is your turn now." Parents, terrified, forbade their children from walking near St. Mary's, but the sightings continued. And always the same description. Rose no longer looked like a child. She looked older, her face elongated, as though time had passed differently for her beneath the earth. The parish tightened its grip, silencing rumors, insisting the visions were hysteria. But behind closed doors, the bishop convened secret meetings. They were not asking how to stop the hauntings. They were asking how to keep them contained. After Thomas's death, Eleanor no longer tried to disguise her obsession. She left food offerings at Rose's grave, bread, milk, small cuts of meat. Not for her daughter, she explained to neighbors, but for the ones who confessed through her. She withdrew from parish life entirely, yet at night, villagers claimed to see her moving through the cemetery with a lantern, whispering. Some said she carried small doll parts, glass eyes, fragments of porcelain limbs, collected from thrift stalls and abandoned homes. She sewed them into new figures. By 1888, she was no longer considered sane. Local children mocked her as the doll mother, but older parishioners crossed themselves whenever she passed, for fear her grief carried judgment. Her final recorded words came in 1890, when a physician attempted to commit her to an asylum in Augusta. She hissed, "You bury them in silence, but silence does not forgive. She forgives nothing. She remembers everything." Eleanor died in confinement the following spring. Yet attendants swore that, on the night of her passing, her room filled with the sound of children's voices, hundreds of them, praying the Hail Mary in unison. In 1893, construction workers repairing the foundation of St. Mary's Parish stumbled upon something horrific, a hidden vault beneath the sacristy. Inside lay a row of small coffins, unmarked, 12 in total. Parish records denied their existence. When opened, they revealed the remains of children, dressed not in burial garments, but in scraps of clerical vestments, each clutching fragments of dolls. The bishop quickly sealed the vault and dismissed the workers. Officially, it was recorded as a repository of storm-damaged relics, but the men who had seen it swore they would never forget the stench, nor the sight of tiny porcelain hands clasped in decayed fingers. The discovery lent credence to Callahan's notes, that dolls had been used as ritual vessels, binding unshriven children to the parish as a silent ledger of its failures. And if Rose's dolls had been buried with her, they were not alone. They were part of something larger. By the turn of the century, the Diocese of Portland ordered strict silence on all matters concerning St. Mary's unmarked children. Priests who questioned the matter were reassigned. Those who persisted were removed entirely. In 1901, Father Callahan himself vanished while traveling to Boston. His baggage was later recovered, containing his journals. One entry read, "They do not confess for the dead, they confess for us. The children carry what we bury. We are no longer shepherds, we are parasites." The church labeled him unstable. His disappearance was never investigated. His journals disappeared into diocesan archives. The silence held for decades, but silence does not erase memory. The townsfolk of Bangor, generation after generation, told their children the same warning: do not follow the girl with the dolls. She does not forgive. In 1924, 40 years after Rose's death, a photograph surfaced at an estate sale in Boston. It was small, sepia, cracked at the edges. It showed a girl in a white dress seated upright, surrounded by dolls. The buyer, a collector of Victorian mourning art, recognized at once that this was not ordinary post-mortem photography. He wrote in his diary that the dolls seem more animate than the child herself. One appears to smirk. Another's hand, which I swear was porcelain, rests against her knee. 2 weeks later, the man was found dead in his study, his face locked in a contorted grin. The photograph was gone. Rumors claim it was retrieved by diocesan officials. Others say it remains in private hands, passed down like a cursed relic. To this day, Bangor historians whisper that if you find it, you will know. For when you stare into the doll's glass eyes, you hear children whispering your name. In 1932, a diocesan archivist named Francis Doyle wrote a private confession, never intended for release. It was discovered only after his death, hidden in the false bottom of a trunk. Doyle admitted he had once been tasked with transporting the Cavanaugh file from Portland to Boston, but curiosity consumed him. He opened it on the train. Inside were fragments, Callahan's journals, Eleanor's notes, and, most disturbing, transcripts of children's confessions allegedly recorded by priests, yet never attributed to any living child. The words chilled him: admissions of theft, lust, violence, even murder, sins belonging not to the young but unmistakably to adults. Doyle realized the truth. Priests had unburdened themselves by writing their confessions into these child vessels. The dolls were never for children at all. They were repositories for clerical shame. Rose had carried not her own darkness, but that of the men who knelt before the altar. In 1937, St. Mary's orphanage, attached to the parish, caught fire. Witnesses claimed the flames began in the attic, where dozens of dolls were stored, gifts for children waiting to be blessed. Survivors described a sound inside the blaze, the shrill cries of many voices overlapping, chanting in broken Latin. Firefighters found porcelain fragments fused into the floorboards, melted into grotesque shapes resembling teeth. The bishop again dismissed it as hysteria. But privately, one nun admitted to a journalist that she had warned the clergy for years. The dolls whisper at night. The children hear them. They tell them things no child should know. After the fire, the orphanage was never rebuilt. The ground was sold and paved, though locals say no grass grows there to this day. By the 1940s, Bangor residents whispered that Rose's ghost still lingered. Sightings increased around the cemetery, always described the same way: a girl in white, her face no longer childish but stretched, almost maternal, followed by 6 figures half her height. Children claimed she demanded they play confession. Adults who scoffed at these tales often woke in the night to the sound of porcelain tapping against their bedroom walls. Some swore they saw dolls on their mantels turn their heads ever so slightly. The phenomenon grew so notorious that during World War II, soldiers from Bangor carried charms to ward her off. One diary entry from a young soldier killed in France reads simply, "She came to me last night. She told me my sins. She told me I would not return." Today, the Cavanaugh farmhouse is gone. St. Mary's stands in ruins. The cemetery is quiet, but archives whisper of a single surviving doll preserved in private hands. No museum dares display it. Those who claim to have seen it say its eyes are not glass but human, clouded, watching. The true horror of Rose Cavanaugh's story is not her tragic death. It is what her dolls carried: the sins of a parish, the corruption of priests, the hidden trauma of a community that chose silence over truth. Rose did not die alone. She bore the weight of a church that used children as vessels. And when she was buried with her dolls, she did not carry those sins into the grave. She carried them forward.